Greetings, listeners. Howard and I sat down with an AmLaw leader who took the helm before Bear Stearns' collapse, steered through the GFC and COVID, and now AI. We dig into AI's Jevons Paradox, how this AM law firm began based on pro bono convictions, and why this is still a people business. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to the Future is Bright podcast. My name is Chris Batz, joined by my co-host, Howard Rosenberg. Howard and I are at the center of law firm talent and strategic growth here in New York City. Howard is a partner and the head of talent intelligence and acquisitions at Barrett & Brunel, and I advise and facilitate law firm mergers, PE investments, and strategic growth planning at Columbus Street. And today, we have a very exciting guest, Gary Wingens, chair and partner of Lowenstein Sandler. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
So, Gary, want to jump in. So you had shared with Howard and I that you just recently transitioned from managing partner to chair. What did you want to get right most during that kind of leadership handoff? What were you really trying to achieve when you were doing that?
Great question. Thanks for asking that. Really, stability, right? Transitions in law firm can be a time of instability, and worked hard over the course of roughly 3 years with our executive committee to make sure that we had a real plan, that people knew where we were going, that our partners felt included in the process, and that the leadership handoff would ensure both continuity and change.
And aside from the wonderful points you just pointed out of how you're trying to achieve these things, where do you think law firms go wrong in trying to do these transitions?
So one of my challenges as the chair and for 18 years managing partner of Lowenstein Sandler is that I've never worked in any other law firms. I've been at Lowenstein since I was a summer associate 39 years ago. So you know, I personally, don't love going to a co-chair or co-managing partner model that many firms have picked. I really feel it's pretty important for one person to own it and one person to lose sleep, and for partners to know that there's one person to go to, and that forum shopping, won't necessarily be all that helpful to them. So you see a lot of firms going to co-chairs or co-managing partners. We did not do that. You see a lot of firms where the incumbent or outgoing chair or managing partner really picks their successors. I thought it was important not to do that. And in fact, I wasn't even on the succession committee. They met with me, and I think they valued my opinion since I've been the person in the hot seat for so long, but the committee was mostly made up of folks in other generations than where I am, who it's really their firm, and they need to make sure they're comfortable with the person for the next, hopefully 20 years.
So Gary, you presided over one of the most probably consistent growth runs in kind of AmLaw history. So what did you think you actually got wrong? And number two is, what would you do differently if you were starting out in 2026?
Wow. We're going right through what did you get wrong? After that lead-in of the most consistent growth run. How about what did I get right? What did I get wrong? I get things wrong all the time. And I think certainly.
What was the most challenging thing you had to deal with in your tenure? Put it that way.
Yeah, look, we had in my tenure as managing partner, I started as managing partner on February 13th, 2008, exactly 1 month before Bear Stearns basically tipped over, and 7 months before my then largest client, Lehman Brothers, filed Chapter 11 at midnight on September 14th. And I'd say that period was really challenging. And the whole global financial crisis, putting apart my personal practice that I was a structured finance lawyer, which was at the heart of what brought the world to a seeming standstill in September of 2008. We did the first layoff in firm history in February of 2009. That was extremely difficult and personally took a real kind of psychic toll on me, especially someone who had been at the firm for, at that point, 22 years. And, I knew every single person who we were laying off. And I think a layoff should be hard, but that was particularly difficult when I look back. But I do think the experience of the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, did help when COVID came around in 2020, because it felt in many ways very similar. It didn't have the negative impact to law firms that the GFC did. And, what was completely surprising about that, and Howard, what I got wrong in February and March of 2020 is we were running 13-week forward-looking cash flows to figure out when we would run out of cash, because we were sure that clients wouldn't pay bills, right? This is a global pandemic. Who's going to pay lawyers? It turns out clients paid their bills. Turns out they actually needed more legal advice rather than less legal advice. I was the first law firm to call Citibank and tell them, who's our bankers at the time, and tell them we were drawing down our entire line of credit on March 12th, 2020. And the person who headed the law firm group at the time literally laughed at me when I explained to him why I was doing it. Then he shared that a week later, they had $5 billion of lines that had been drawn. So, I guess it wasn't that funny. But thankfully, we repaid the entire line 6 weeks later, when it turned out, things didn't go as badly as one would think when you're considering a global pandemic that shuts down the main financial centers in the world.
And what would you do differently if you could rerun this thing, basically?
What would I do differently if I knew what I know now back in 2008 and 2009? I probably would have been much more aggressive sooner on our lateral growth strategy and would have leaned in even harder. One of the things that we did very early on in my tenure in the first year, certain that we were in for a big bounce with economic recovery, because in my lifetime, and certainly over the course of my career, every time we had a big drop, we had a big V-shaped recovery. So, another thing I got wrong going into 2009, I assumed we'd see a big V-shaped recovery. And we convened a strategic planning process, and we decided we were going to focus on sectors as a firm. And we picked private capital, life sciences, and technology as our sectors. We got that shockingly right. In a way that, it's kind of amazing how in the 15 years following, in a world of free money, basically, that started in 2009 with the Obama stimulus bill, a lot of that free money ended up in exactly those sectors, and going to those sectors to do transactions that required lawyers. So, if you were to reframe the question, what do we do right? What we did right is, whether we were lucky or smart, we picked the right sectors for the next 15, 16 years. And that was before it was fashionable to focus on sectors. What I would do differently now, with the confidence that I have after 18 years in the seat, would have been, I would have leaned in a lot faster. in those sectors. But that hindsight is 2020.
Gary, you have a theory on AI, and I'd love for you to share with our audience kind of the logic of how you believe AI is going to create more work, not less, for law firms and how that affects associates. Pull us into your thinking in your
Sure.
world on that.
And this theory keeps evolving. And when it's different this week a little bit than when we talked about it last week, because, with new models out there, the world has changed yet again. But basically, what I'll call my optimistic view, and I think I have to add a quick disclaimer for your audience, is that I have a vested interest in my optimism, and that I have three sons, two of whom are practicing lawyers, and one who is starting law school this summer. So your listeners should use that as a grain of salt on my view, so you know where I'm coming from. So what we are seeing already with the AI tools we have is that we are getting way more efficient at a lot of tasks that historically have run up legal fees. So whether that's, and it's still very early days, right? So on the deal side, due diligence, AI is really helpful in filtering through voluminous documents. In our private funds area, reviewing and cataloging side letter agreements where you have hundreds of investors in a fund, and being able to use natural language to ask the LLM what rights a new investor should be entitled to under side letters based on prior letters. And that task may have taken 20, 25 hours previously, and you can do it in seconds now with the right model. In litigation, when drafting a brief and finding quotes or citations in discovery documents and depositions that support what your thesis is. And I can go on and on with examples in the insurance space, reviewing 60 years of insurance policies. And all of this has to be cross-checked and verified, but you don't have to verify 100%. So the cost is for large litigation, for large transactions, should come down, and is coming down. The clients see the hourly rate. Hourly rates are not coming down. You saw last year, the data is that hourly rates were up on average 10.5% in the AmLaw 100. But I've never met a client that wants to buy hours. A client wants to buy solutions. So the unit of value is the deal or the litigation. The price of that unit will come down, even as hourly rates, I think, will continue to go up in what appears to many as an unreasonable way. We could talk about that if you want to. So anyway, cost of the thing that clients want to buy is coming down, and will continue to come down. Jevons Paradox is that, and this comes out of the 1800s when coal became plentiful and cheaper. What happens when the cost of a good comes down is demand generally goes up. It doesn't go down. And we are seeing, and we have concrete examples of cases where a client didn't want to pursue a matter, we have examples in litigation, we have examples in our structured finance practice that I'm the most knowledgeable of, where a couple of years ago, we quoted a client a fee to review thousands of documents to make sure that their systems were properly characterizing them. And the fee was really high. And the client said, no, at that price, we're not going to do it. We then did another transaction for that client this past year where we used one of our AI tools to review similar documents. And they said, hey, remember that project we asked you about a few years ago? what if you use that, whiz bang AI tool to do that? And we were able to quote them a price that was 70% lower. Um,
Wow. Wow.
and they said, okay, well, at that price, and call it $1 million, just to make it easy, at $1 million, we'll do it. At 8 million, we won't do it. At 8 million, we had zero revenue and zero work for our junior associates. At $1 million, we had $1 million of revenue, and virtually all of that was done using AI plus junior associates verifying, and then some senior time to review the work of the juniors.
Wow.
I think you're going to see that over and over again.
Wow.
So
now, looking at that, Gary, just what you're saying without divulging internal, like proprietary numbers, profitability, did it change much between the two as you quote them?
I mean, profitability. Well, first of all, on the work we didn't get, we had zero profit. But on the model of the work, we clearly, if we had charged and we're using a round number of say 8 million, yeah, we would have had more profitability, but more profit to the bottom line, but we didn't get the work anyway. So, but at $1 million, where it will be a profitable engagement, we will get a return. And this is why it actually makes sense that rates have gone up over the years, because we're going to get a return both on the compensation costs, which are direct costs, as well as the computer costs that we've invested. So, you have to do more of them, and you need a good amount of volume to make up for other things that that certainly are going to go away, that are going to be done by agents, or that that clients are going to take in-house because they're going to have the same technology we have.
So you used a tool. You used a tool. You produced a result. The pricing changed. The client came back to you, so you had $1 million that you didn't have. To our audience, Gary, who are law firm executives in law firms of all sizes, particularly corporate law firms, how should leaders think about AI transformation without overreacting to some of the hype that's out there? Like maybe using your case.
I think it's hard to overreact.
Okay.
So, and I want to just add one thing to what you said. So yeah, we had revenue, but when we didn't do the review because the client wasn't willing to pay the higher price tag, and they were right about that because it wasn't worth it. They basically had an unknown level of risk that was sitting in those documents that had not been reviewed. It was a totally rational business decision not to review them because they figured it was worth taking the risk. But after the review, at a much lower price point, they knew what their risk was, and so their business was far better off as well. And so it does just keeping the focus on the client for a moment. It really does benefit the client as well, because it's work that needed to be done, but it was too expensive to do it the old way. So in terms of how to think about this, in general, I think, it's important. We're a lot of us are still talking about how cool the tools are, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or Harvey, Legora, whatever, CoCounsel. In the medium term, and I don't know if that's 1 year or 3 years, that's going to level out, I think. We're all going to basically be using the same stuff. The differences between the models is going to get much narrower. Our clients are going to have access to the same tools. So I think for law firms, we have to think about, well, what's our competitive moat? What makes us different? How do we differentiate the product? Just saying our lawyers are using Harvey or Legora is not going to be a differentiator. It was a year ago. It's not so much anymore, but it certainly won't be a year from now. So thinking about your own intellectual capital the proprietary data that you have in your document management system, in your email system, in your time and billing system, and how do you take these tools that are magical and expose them to your proprietary data that's meaningful. And the hard part for firms is figuring out what's meaningful. We have in our iManage system, which is our document management system, we have roughly 100 million documents in our document management system. How many of those do you actually want an AI agent reading and taking as the source of truth? I don't know, 5 million, 3 million, right? And figuring out how do you train the robot to find the truth and the right documents that you want it learning from that reflect the best judgment of your people, and not sit there and read 10 first draft purchase and sale agreements drafted by summer associates or first year associates. No offense to summer associates and first year associates. But and having it go in the wrong path because of that, because these models are easily distracted, and are just doing probability weighting. So if you're dragging it down with 95 million documents that don't have the right answer and only 5 million that have the right answer, you got to figure out how to privilege those 5 million and how to make sure it's focused on those. And that's really hard that's hard for our firm. I think it's hard for most law firms. And when you see the announcements lately of firms who are spending and committing big dollars to their AI efforts, I think a lot of that is very much focusing on getting the right proprietary data set as the focus of the agents and the LLMs, rather than all the knowledge that happens to be in their system.
So, Gary, speaking of hard things for law firms to deal with, you mentioned in your example of the $1 million kind of transaction. If the technology winds up leveling out, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the pricing on a portfolio basis across the firm. Because in your example, you mentioned concrete issue here. But that's probably going to ramp up across the entire firm, across all the practice areas, about making those judgment calls on pricing and packaging things that you might be lower here, but then higher here. You might bundle here. You might kind of do this a la carte. I mean, is the firm prepared? Is the partnership prepared to kind of have those discussions going forward as the technology starts to really come in mainstream, basically?
I think we're going to have to. And, logic dictates that we should do what almost every other professional services sector has done and move to project-based pricing. And because the billable hour is going to become more and more irrelevant. And, I think at some point it was a proxy for the firm's cost and somewhat scaled with the value of a project. That's not true anymore, right? And that hasn't been true for a very long time. And if you find somebody with real expertise who can answer a question off the top of their head and charge you 1/10 of an hour, even if their rate is $5,000 an hour, that's a way better deal than going to a firm, where your friend is at, who has never done that deal before, but needs to send an associate into the library or the virtual library and sends you a bill for $50,000 for the research. Having said that, I've thought for a long time that we should move to project-based billing, that the hourly rate didn't make a lot of sense. Most internal counsel I talk to, in theory, agree and would prefer the budget certainty. Some have moved to alternative fee arrangements, but there remains a really high level of distrust in my view between clients and lawyers when it comes to pricing and billing. And there are still a lot of clients who are more comfortable with the billable hour and getting the reports of what people have done in those billable hours, and can make their own judgment as to reasonableness. Then there are clients who are saying, yeah, just tell me how much it's going to cost. I don't care how many hours you spend on it. Even though we all would agree in theory, that's the right answer. So it's possible that we move to more alternatives or project-based pricing. It's also possible that we keep going with hourly rates that continue to increase in double-digit percentages, well ahead of the inflation rate.
Yeah. Gary, you have witnessed, we've all witnessed just rapid scaling of law firms, rapid growth. And yet, Lowenstein is 350, close to 400 attorneys. Is that correct?
We're around 400. Yeah, 350 is kind of an FTE basis, but 400 humans.
Okay. So. Would you agree that what may some people think is your size a disadvantage of the paradigm of practicing law? You're not 3,000 or some of the very large firms that supposedly that's where all the value is and the momentum and this perception of scale. Would you say the game's changed? Would you say it's flipped and you guys now have a competitive advantage because you don't have the overhead?
I don't know if it's fully changed yet. I'd say if you speak to most consultants to the industry, as you guys regularly do, people are still saying that scale, or saying that AI makes scale more important. I think they're right, but in a limited sense. Scale in your areas that you choose to be top of the market in is really important, because you have to have enough proprietary data in order for the AI to be effective, right? And you have to have, so we have one of the largest venture capital practices out there. We do over 500 venture investment transactions a year. Last year, we did close to 100 venture-backed M&A deals. Sure, there are firms out there, not a lot, but a handful that do significantly more than we do. But we have statistical significance in that area where we know market, right? We have recently been opposite every player in the business. So our data set is, I would say, as good, even if not as large, as some of the much larger competitors. So I think it's more and more important to pick the areas where you want to go deep, and overall firm size is less important, as opposed to the depth in the areas that you choose to be kind of a world expert in.
Excellent. So Gary, 2008, when you took the helm, you formalized something called the Lowenstein Center for Public Interest. Why was that a priority for you, and how does that today still operate within your firm, those values?
Chris, thanks for asking that question, because our firm's pro bono commitment has always been incredibly close to my heart. It is in our firm's DNA. When I was a summer associate and had lunch with Alan Lowenstein, the founder of our firm, he spent most of the lunch talking about the pro bono and community service work that he did as a young lawyer and then throughout his career. And he loved telling the story of how he left the firm that he had started his career at and had been a partner at, because there was a client who was complaining about some of the work he was doing in civic reform in the city of Newark, New Jersey. And the client basically said, either he stops doing that work or we're pulling our business. So the managing partner of that firm went to him at the time and said, either you stop doing this work or we've got a problem with our largest client. And Alan said, no problem, I'll leave and start my own firm.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Ironically, that client ultimately hired him. because he was the best banking lawyer in the city at the time. But in any event, and that has always been that was a value that Alan instilled in all of his partners. But by the time I was rising up through the leadership rungs in the early 2000s, Alan was no longer active. And our pro bono model had become, if the phone rings, we'll answer it. And if it rings with a project that we have lawyers that want to do, we'll take the work. And we were always doing a lot of pro bono work, but it wasn't at all organized. In 2000, as the storm clouds were gathering in 2008, and we saw the distress that was happening in the world, as I mentioned, I was a structured finance lawyer, so I was particularly close to what was going on in the housing market. We came up with an idea to hire a full-time pro bono partner, and to basically brand our pro bono efforts and flip the model. Basically, rather than waiting for the phone to ring, we would figure out how do we use the intellectual capabilities of our lawyers in their areas of expertise to go out and find the work for those lawyers where they can add special value that a lot of other lawyers don't. One of the first projects we came across was in the housing space, where we had a pro bono client that we were doing some real estate work for that was looking to buy a portfolio of defaulted mortgage loans, and so that they could restructure the loans, keep the homeowners in those houses rather than having them closed on, and then help the homeowners get new jobs, and because the studies in urban areas, especially in Newark, New Jersey, and Orange, New Jersey, and Irvington, was that once you have one house in foreclosure on a block, it tends to start a domino effect, and that you lose the whole block pretty quickly once houses start getting boarded up. So we were able, when we heard about this project, we're like, oh my gosh, this is what we do. We buy portfolios. We help big banks and investment banks buy portfolios of mortgage loans and servicing rights. We know how to do this. There aren't a lot of lawyers out there that do that kind of work. There was as part of the Obama stimulus plan, HUD was looking to spend about $1 billion to help to create a fund to help buy these loans. Our investment management practice was able to help create that fund, and lots of the big bank foundations contributed to it. And I'm very proud to say that has kept going, and roughly 5,000 homeowners are still in their homes today because of the work that we started doing in 2008. And I'll also throw in that the person who led that work at Lowenstein was the person who is now my successor as managing partner of the firm. And that is one of the criteria that our succession committee looked to in when they were looking for a successor, somebody who also had a pro bono commitment that was close to their heart. So I'm super proud of all the work we've done there in a number of core areas. But as I tell our junior associates and my own kids all the time, pro bono work is so important for your career. You get so much more out of it than, it's great to represent private capital funds, technology companies, life sciences companies, but it's also great to represent people with real struggles in the real world who don't have the privilege of paying or being able to pay the rates that we charge for the work that we do. And it brings you, it makes your life so much more meaningful and gives you a level of satisfaction that is, let's say, different than representing large financial institutions.
Gary, last question I have is, you've watched the lateral market from inside for nearly 2 decades.
Yeah.
What do firms consistently get wrong when they're acquiring talent? Question near and dear to my heart, obviously.
Right. Again, it's hard for me to comment on what other firms get wrong. I know at times we've gotten it wrong when we're responding or reacting too quickly to a departure at our own firm, or some trend that may or may not be emerging in the market, and trying to get ahead of it. So that can happen. We sometimes get it wrong in not probing deeply enough in terms of the person's experience and credentials and client relationships. But we often get it right, and where we get it right is when we are picking up people earlier in their career who have shown that clients actually want to hire them, and they may not have a huge book of business yet. They may not yet be attractive to the very top tier firms because they haven't yet developed a $5 to $10 million book, but they've shown us that their work that they're doing is in our core sectors, and that clients have been willing to hire them, even if on relatively small project, but they've come back to them. And we have seen people like that blossom beautifully on our platform. And that's more of an indicator than overall size of claimed book, for example.
Thank you. What was the driving force about you going to law school, becoming a lawyer?
Other than I had no other skills. So, it was the 1980s, and the deal markets were very hot, and it seemed like becoming a lawyer and becoming a transactional lawyer would be a lot of fun. And so I went to a liberal arts college, Brandeis University. Majored in economics, and law school seemed like a natural progression of what I would do next. I went straight through from college to law school, which was in fashion at the time. But I did learn very quickly while in law school that one of the more interesting things you could do as a lawyer is not only represent clients, but also get much more deeply involved in your own community, in community organizations and nonprofit organizations. And for me, that has been deeply meaningful. And it's I have since I was, I think, a second-year associate, I've always been on numerous nonprofit boards and community organizations, and I've learned a tremendous amount through that involvement. I think I would largely credit my being asked to become managing partner of the firm based on some of the hard lessons I had learned, and in having pretty senior positions in nonprofits on their executive committees. I was board chair of my kids' private school, and people notice that, and people notice that you're someone who other folks look to for leadership, and it gives you the opportunity to show those leadership chops and learn the challenges of leadership much earlier in your career.
Gary, in closing, would love for you to share advice for up and coming law firm leaders as we're entering in kind of an interesting age of consolidation in tech and capital and things like that. What advice would you give these law firm leaders?
Yeah, so great question. I'll continue from Howard's question, where in retrospect, super valuable to have other leadership experience before you get into the role of running a law firm. So, and finding the opportunity to do that in what might be considered a lower stakes environment, like a nonprofit or a community organization, because if you mess up, it won't be as obvious, but you'll learn a lot by messing up, right? Because I think in general, leaders have to do stuff wrong before they get it right. Yeah. And if you don't do things wrong, you're not learning the right lessons. I think it is also important, and this is a lesson that I learned pretty early on that surprised me, that people go through a lot of stuff in life, and we are still fundamentally in a people business, even if I like talking about AI a lot. We are a people business. Our clients, the clients who choose us are still people, not AI agents, and our partners and associates and business services staff are all people. You can't take a short-term view with people. People have lives, people have careers. We all go through ups and downs in our lives. And if you have someone who is a strong performer for some period of time, and then they hit some kind of bump in the road, if you stick with them through that bump in the road and support them, they will come back, usually. And they will be forever grateful and loyal to you for having supported them through their hard times, and recognizing and giving them comfort that people go through stuff, and we're here to support you, and just as you have supported us through your career.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. Gary, please finish the sentence. The future is bright because
I have an 18-month-old granddaughter.
Yeah, that's a good reason. Gary, how can people find you, follow you on social media?
I'm on LinkedIn, Gary Wingens, Wingens.
Excellent. Gary, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. Appreciate it.